On Daly was never supposed to look clean. That was part of the attraction. The swing was too long. The body was not built like a corporate brochure. The clothes were loud. The cigarettes were visible. The Diet Coke was part of the costume before people even understood it was a costume. Daly did not enter golf as a polished product. He entered it like someone had left the side door open. And then, in 1991, he walked through it. He was not the chosen face of the PGA Championship. He was not the story the sport had prepared. He was a late call-up, a ninth reserve, a rookie who barely knew the course. By the end of the week, he was a major champion. That should have been impossible. But impossible stories are useful in sports. They sell belief. They sell romance. They let an old institution pretend that the door was always open. John Daly became that fantasy. The outsider who won, the man who did not fit the room, then owned the room. But golf did not know what else came with him. The number came later. 50 million, 60 million. According to Daly's own public account, that was the range of money he said he lost during years of heavy gambling. Suddenly, the story was no longer only about distance. It was about appetite, about risk, about what happens when a sport turns a man into a folk hero, then realizes the folk hero does not stop performing when the round is over. Daly was not just a golfer with problems. He became a business problem, a ratings problem, a sponsor problem, a discipline problem, and still, somehow, a fan favorite. That was the part nobody wanted to explain too closely. Because if John Daly was bad for golf's image, why did golf keep returning to him? Why did cameras stay close? Why did crowds keep following? Why did the same industry that preferred clean shirts, quiet answers, and controlled emotions still need the man who kept breaking the frame? Years later, another kind of disruption arrived. It did not look like Daly. Kevin Kisner did not burst into golf like a storm. He did not look like a superhero. He did not build his career around impossible speed. He did not make people stop walking on the range just to watch the ball fly. His gift was smaller, colder, more irritating. Kisner understood what he lacked. And in professional golf, that can be more valuable than pretending you have everything. He did not have the most firepower. He said as much. In a sport increasingly obsessed with launch monitors, ball speed, carry distance, and the violence of modern driving, that admission mattered. Because golf had started measuring power so aggressively that the absence of power looked like a flaw. Kisner turned it into leverage. In match play, he did not need to overwhelm you. He needed to stay there. Fairway, green, putt, par, half, birdie when you relaxed, another half when you expected him to disappear, another putt that did not look dramatic until it stole the hole from under your feet. He called it being annoying. Not magical, not domino. Annoying. That word is easy to laugh at until you understand what it means inside a match. Annoying means the opponent never gets a clean breath. Annoying means no free holes. Annoying means your good shot does not end the conversation. Annoying means every mistake has to be paid for in public. In stroke play, the field is the enemy. In match play, the man beside you becomes the weather. You do not just manage the course. You manage pressure, tempo, silence, irritation, waiting, momentum, and the private fear that the other man will not go away. That was Kisner's weapon. Not intimidation through size, attrition through presence. John Daly made golf nervous because he was too much. Kevin Kisner made opponents nervous because he was never quite enough to dismiss. That is where the comparison begins, not in a personal feud. There is no public evidence that John Daly and Kevin Kisner represent some deep private rivalry. The stronger story is not hatred. It is contrast. It is what happens when two different forms of anti-country club energy appear in the same sport, separated by generation, media economy, and method. Daly fought clean golf with a chaotic life. Kisner fought clean golf with the dry voice. One man made the institution sweat by being uncontrollable. The other made it sweat by being too honest to sound scripted. And that difference tells you something about what golf became. In Daly's prime, disruption was something the sport endured. It came in the form of a player who smoked, gambled, drank, hit it miles, won majors, and forced golf to decide whether winning was enough to forgive everything else. His chaos was not polished. That was why people believed it. But chaos without packaging is dangerous for an industry. It cannot be scheduled neatly. It cannot always be placed between sponsor obligations. It cannot always be softened into a brand-safe clip. Daly's story moved the old way. Newspapers, television highlights, locker room whispers, disciplinary files, autobiography, interviews where the confession became part of the performance. Each time, the same question returned. Was Daly being honest, or was honesty simply the last thing he had left to sell? The answer may not be simple. His defenders would say he never pretended to be perfect. They would say golf needed someone like him because Daly showed the audience a man, not a mannequin. They would say the sport's obsession with image made his flaws look larger because he refused to hide them elegantly. There is truth in that. There is another side. His critics would say talent does not excuse damage. They would point to the gambling, the suspensions reported over the years, the public volatility, the people around a star who had to absorb the cost of the star's appetites. They would say golf did not merely forgive Daly, it profited from forgiving him. That is harder to dismiss, because Daly's image became a machine. The long drives, the pants, the cigarettes, the casino stories, the comeback attempts, the pain, the survival. Even his wounds became content. That is not only a John Daly story, that is an industry story. Sports do not just celebrate winners, they manufacture emotional assets. A clean champion sells aspiration, a broken champion sells access. Daly gave golf something rare, a champion who made ordinary people feel less excluded from an elite game. He did not look like the gatekeeper. He looked like the guy who had crashed the gate. Kisner came from a different economy. By the time his public image sharpened, golf had changed. The sport no longer lived only on network broadcasts and Sunday newspaper columns. It lived in clips, podcasts, side conversations, betting apps, YouTube matches, social feeds, and broadcast booths, trying to sound less like broadcast booths. Personality became its own market. Not just how you played, how you talked, how fast you reacted, how little you sounded like a press release. Kisner was built for that shift. His game had already trained him for discomfort. He knew how to survive without overpowering the room. He knew how to make limitation look intentional. He understood timing. He understood irritation. He understood that bluntness, delivered calmly, could travel farther online than a perfect drive. So when television wanted a fresher voice, Kisner made sense. He was not just a player becoming an analyst. He was a product fit. A man who could say what viewers thought players were thinking. A man who could translate bad decisions without dressing them up. A man who promised no fluff. That sounded like honesty. But honesty changes shape when money touches it. On the course, bluntness is competitive. In a podcast, it is entertainment. Inside a broadcast deal, it becomes risk. That is the narrow bridge Kisner began walking. And the warning signs were not hidden. There had already been moments where the straight line became too straight. In 2020, he apologized after a reckless comment during the COVID period. Years later, as his media role grew, he apologized again after criticizing CBS's Masters coverage on a podcast, acknowledging that he had gone too far. Individually, those moments do not prove a grand scandal. They are not crimes. They are not verdicts, but they do form a timeline. A player known for saying what he thinks becomes valuable because he says what he thinks. Then the same quality that creates value creates exposure. The industry rewards the edge, then asks the edge to behave like a cushion. That is the pattern, not guilt, pressure. Kisner's career is almost a study in controlled insufficiency. He did not have enough power to play the modern game the easy way. So he made the game narrow. He made the opponent work. He made every hole feel like an argument. Then, as a broadcaster, he brought the same method to commentary. He did not need to be loud. He only needed to make the comfortable version of events feel slightly less comfortable. That is why the Daly comparison matters. Daly was not subtle. His disruption announced itself from a mile away. You could see it in the swing, the body, the habits, the headlines. He was an old media spectacle, impossible to ignore, difficult to manage. too popular to discard. Kisner is more modern. His disruption is cleaner. It comes with timing, with deadpan humor, with enough restraint to be employable, with enough edge to be shareable. Daly was chaos that golf could not fully control. Kisner is candor that golf believes it can control. But belief is not the same as control. The business of golf has always depended on image. Not only the image of players, but the image of the game itself. The quiet gallery, the handshake, the sponsor logo, the charity check, the soft focus family feature, the idea that wealth and discipline and tradition all point in the same moral direction. Daly interrupted that illusion. He showed that a man could win the oldest rooms in golf and still bring disorder with him. Kisner interrupts a newer illusion. The idea that sports media can buy authenticity, place it behind a microphone, and decide exactly when it stops being authentic. That is the dangerous part. Because the modern golf industry wants edge now. It needs edge. Traditional broadcasts are fighting for attention against YouTube golf, player podcasts, gambling content, influencer matches, behind-the-scenes clips, and a younger audience that does not always want reverence. They want friction. They want jokes. They want someone to say the shot was bad when the shot was bad. Kisner offers that. But once the audience believes him, the industry inherits a problem. What happens when the honest guy is honest about the wrong partner? The wrong network? The wrong production choice? The wrong player? The wrong system? That was not as much of a problem when players only spoke through controlled interviews. It becomes a bigger problem when the same person is competitor, commentator, podcast guest, friend of players, critic of coverage, and part of the product being sold. Every role touches another role. Every opinion has a business shadow. That is where Daly and Kisner meet again. Daly blurred the line between player and spectacle. Kisner blurs the line between player and media operator. Daly's life became part of the show. Kisner's voice became part of the show. And once that happens, the sport stops asking only whether the man can perform. It asks whether the man can be used. Daly was useful because he made golf feel less sterile. Kisner is useful because he makes golf sound less sterile. Those are not the same thing, but they come from the same weakness in the industry. Golf fears boredom. It rarely admits that. It covers the fear with tradition. It talks about legacy, etiquette, respect, purity, patience. All of that is real. But behind the language is another pressure. Attention. The audience must stay. The broadcast must hold. The sponsors must believe. The platform must grow. The clip must travel. A clean sport still needs dirty energy. Daly gave it dirty energy in human form. Kisner gives it controlled friction. And match play was the perfect laboratory for his image. Because match play is not only golf. It is a negotiation of discomfort. A player like Kisner does not need to dominate the analytics model to dominate the mood. He can lose the driving contest and still win the emotional one. He can be outgunned and still make the stronger player feel hunted. That is why his annoying quote matters. It sounds like a joke. It is not a joke. It is a philosophy of survival. In a sport that increasingly rewards measurable superiority, Kisner found value in what is harder to measure. Refusal, irritation, rhythm, stubbornness, the weight of a man who will not give you permission to relax. That is not superhero golf. That is debt collector golf. Every hole, he comes back for something. Daly's power worked differently. He made opponents feel small because the ball went places theirs did not. He made the course look improperly designed. At Crooked Stick in 1991, the story was not only that Daly won, the story was that he seemed to play a different map. Hazards built for normal players did not always apply to him. That creates awe. Kisner creates fatigue. Awe and fatigue are both forms of pressure. One expands the room, the other drains the room. Daly made golf ask, how is this possible? Kisner made opponents ask, why is he still here? That difference is the whole film. Not everyone will see it this way. Some will say this comparison tries to make too much out of two very different careers. Daly is a two-time major champion and one of golf's great folk legends. Kisner is a four-time PGA Tour winner, a match play specialist, and now a media voice. Their resumes are not the same. Their scandals are not the same. Their cultural weight is not the same. That is fair. The point is not that Kisner is another Daly. He is not. The point is that golf keeps creating room for people who disturb its preferred image, as long as that disturbance can be converted into attention. Daly disturbed the image by refusing polish. Kisner disturbs it by refusing softness. In one era, the sport tolerated the outlaw because the outlaw brought galleries. In another, it hires the blunt player because bluntness brings credibility. The packaging changed, the hunger did not, and this is where the future becomes risky. Because once a sport teaches its audience to value unscripted personality, scripted personality starts to feel dead. Once viewers hear a commentator say what a player really did wrong, they are less patient with polite fog. Once podcasts let players speak loosely, press conferences feel staged. Once YouTube golf shows the mess, network golf can look too clean to be believed. The industry cannot easily go backward, but it also cannot let everyone speak freely. That is the trap. The same edge that saves attention can damage relationships. The same honesty that builds trust can burn partners. The same chaos that creates myth can consume the person carrying it. Daly already showed one version of that ending. The man became larger than his scorecards. At some point, people stopped watching only to see whether he would win. They watched to see what would happen to him. That is a darker kind of fame. It looks like love from a distance. Up close, it can become surveillance. Kisner is not living that story, but he is standing in a media structure that rewards a cleaner version of the same bargain. Be real, but not too real. Be sharp, but not too sharp. Tell it like it is. But remember who owns the camera. That is not a personal accusation. It is the job description of modern sports media. The analyst must sound independent while sitting inside the machine. The player must sound authentic while protecting access. The podcast guest must entertain without creating a legal meeting the next morning. The former competitor must critique people he still knows, still texts, still sees on practice greens and team rooms. Every sentence has weight. Kisner's strength has always been that he understands weight. On the course, he knew which hole needed patience, which opponent needed irritation, which moment needed a putt that did not look heroic, only necessary. Now the holes are different. A microphone, a podcast, a network relationship, a clip pulled out of context, a sponsor watching quietly, a colleague hearing his name without hearing the full conversation. The same instincts may help him, or they may corner him. That is the unanswered question. Daly's career asks, what happens when a sport falls in love with a man it cannot manage? Kisner's next chapter asks, what happens when a sport hires a man because he sounds unmanageable, then expects him to stay useful? Both stories begin with rebellion. One loud, one dry, one lived in public damage. One delivered through competitive irritation and broadcast candor, but both expose the same fragile center of golf. The game sells control. Its most interesting characters keep proving control is partly an illusion. Daly proved it by winning as the outsider, then dragging his appetites into the spotlight. Kisner proved it by winning without overwhelming force, then turning bluntness into a professional asset. Neither man fits the clean fantasy perfectly. That is why the fantasy needs them, because a perfect sport is hard to believe. A flawed man makes the product feel alive. Near the beginning, the number sounded like the Daly story. 50 million, 60 million. A confession so large it became mythology. But after Kisner, another number matters too. Not money, not distance, not even wins. One word, annoying. That was the smaller confession. The colder one, because it revealed the method. You do not always beat power with more power. Sometimes you beat power by staying close enough to make it uncomfortable. Sometimes you do not destroy the system. You irritate it, you outlast it. You make it explain why you are still there. And maybe that is why John Daly versus Kevin Kisner is not really a match. It is a warning about golf itself. The old game wanted clean heroes. The new game wants controlled disruption. But control was never the real story. The real story is what happens when the disruption starts working. And the industry decides it cannot afford to look away.